Welcome to Empower Her, the Help We Need podcast, where we explore topics that empower women and support their well-being. I'm your host, Mumike Murunkeji, and in today's episode, our focus area will be on the career pillar discussion with a dive into the workplace to address the topic of the manager. In this first episode, we shall focus on my manager and you. We're looking at things from the lens of the employee, and that's you. And we will answer some of the questions around that, such as, how do I deal with my manager? How can I work with my manager, who frankly is pissing me off? Or questions such as, my manager doesn't like me, what do I do? Type of question. So my guess is that this issue is never going to stop popping up within the workplace, right? And while this may not be true for everyone, and I congratulate you if you have a good relationship with your manager, this is the ideal situation. And this is how it should be. But most times, this would be the situation where we are dreaming of or would appreciate to be in. However, if this concern of trying to navigate working with your manager is a reality for you right now, then I would say to you, if that gives you some relief, welcome to the club. You are not alone in this. Now, for most of us, as we're coming up in our careers, or we feel we've come to a point of we're stabilizing in our careers, or maybe we're changing jobs, or it could be we're also changing managers. Working with a manager whose work style is not that appreciated or it's difficult to navigate is not news, right? So I'll be guiding you on what you could do in this episode, first as an employee myself, and wearing the hat of an HR professional. So we'll be having a conversation where I will be sharing some insights gained from me having to work with a difficult manager myself and what I have learned as a result of that relationship. So hopefully my experiential learning and guidance would help you today. So let's address your emotions and how you're feeling as an employee in this situation right now. I'll be honest with you that being in this situation can be nerve-wracking. So why do I say nerve-wracking? Because it affects your relationship with your manager, right? And maybe even others in your workspace. But one thing is sure, it messes up with your emotions because you feel victimized, you feel entitled, you feel justified, and sometimes it's almost like you feel cornered, right? Like you're being squeezed in between a sandwich and you're suffocated, more or less. If hopefully I'm not too dramatic. You feel you're right and your manager is wrong. At least in most cases, this is always the emotion that comes with it. And while sometimes it may be true that your manager could be wrong, I think sometimes it may surprise you as a reflection point, maybe when you look at it retroactively, that maybe the problem was not really your manager. Maybe the problem was the perception and the communication style, or maybe the approach involved. In some cases, it could be just, clash of culture. It could be a clash of interest. It could be a clash of objectives, or just diversity of opinions playing up. So what I would say is, let's address the elephant in the room. And that brings me to the fable of the elephant and the blind man. And I'm sure you've heard of this fable before. So we have a number of blind men who approach an elephant, and they all touched the elephant. And, one touched the elephant's trunk and thought it was a spear. The other touched the elephant's leg and thought it was a tree. The other touched the elephant's body and thought it was a wall. One touched the elephant's ears and thought it was a fan. The other touched the elephant's tail, thought it was a rope, and the other touched the elephant's tusk and thought it was a sword. So each blind man was convinced that their perception was right and the other perception was wrong. They each felt that they were entitled because of their opinion, and sometimes it feels like that. So right now, your experience may be true, and it may not be a total truth. It could be a partial truth, and it could be not the full truth. So remember that there are always two sides to a story, no matter how engaging your side of the story may seem or may sound like. And when you have two people with a clash of opinions, there are always different opinions, expectations, and what have you. So I think the real focal point is if you are listening to this podcast and you're looking for a way out, or at least how you can navigate this predicament, please stay tuned in, because what I'll try to do today is help you to navigate it in a way that hopefully you can resolve the issue, which is our main goal here today. And I hope that you can benefit from some few tips that I will be sharing today. So the first tip is seek feedback and mentorship. So I'll first start with mentorship because in my experience, when I had the opportunity, it's probably what I would say right now because it turned out to be an opportunity at the end of the day to work with a manager whose style was completely different and who I would say was fairly new at managing people. And ability or his ability to communicate was somewhat not necessarily maybe the best approach. I think the most important thing that I did then was talk to a mentor. I spoke with somebody within the organization who I trusted. I was actually getting to a tipping point where I felt like, you know what, I need to throw in the towel and I'm going to resign. So I actually went into that conversation with that intention that I wanted to resign. And my mentor then was able to really help me understand that running away from a problem or running away from an issue was not the solution. So to be honest with you, I was upset. But I've learned that if you want to fix a problem, you don't go with your emotions. You don't start thinking about how you're going to fight back. You need to first of all examine the situation so you could react in the best possible way. So out of hindsight now, after being coached, it was encouraged to get feedback from the people I worked with because it was kind of connected to, I would say, the issue that was communicated to me. So in the communication or the feedback I got, I learned that my stakeholders or the people I was working with at the time were finding it difficult to connect with me. And they kind of felt like I was a bit off or not really taking their issues into consideration. And to be honest with you, when I got the feedback, I couldn't connect the dots. I really didn't understand what to do with the feedback because I was performing, I was doing everything I could, And at the time, it was more like a reaction situation because my manager now was a bit defensive, and it appeared that our relationship wasn't on the best terms. So speaking with my mentor opened up the possibility that this could be an opportunity to get feedback, and this could be an opportunity to better understand what the gaps were or what the issues were and how I could address them. So while this is sounding all straightforward, I think what was also helpful was because I was able to vent. I was able to hear out my my perspective, because I felt like I wasn't given an opportunity to share that with my manager at the time. And I was supported. I was supported emotionally. I was encouraged in a way. I was given words that were lifting, and I was motivated to stay and solve the problem as opposed to running away from the problem. So my advice would be to get somebody that you trust within the organization or outside the organization to kind of interact with, to relate with, to share what's going on, to have them question you, to have them ask questions, to help you see the blind spots, to open your horizon to maybe areas or things that you weren't considering, and to give you a different perspective so that you can come out of that conversation with a clear head and not be really mucked up with emotions and what have you. So it's really important to have somebody who you can talk to. And then one of the things I also mentioned was feedback. So there was a problem, I identified the problem. Now is going back and connecting with my stakeholders or the people I worked with that gave sort of the feedback or gave the impression to fully understand the feedback better. So that really helped a lot, because having had those one-on-one conversations, I narrowed it down to my approach. And one of the feedback I got was it felt like I was too transactional. It felt like I was not friendly and I was too serious. And in a sense, it doesn't mean that those attributes are bad, but when you're in the workplace, you need to be able to loosen up. So those insights were helpful, and the insights from the mentor was also helpful, and because it also was very interactive, and it's me seeking how would you prefer we engage, as opposed to one-on-ones. Some people preferred face-to-face, at least for those within the office, and would prefer that we had our meetings in that way and just get to know me better, and vice versa. So that was really helpful. And I felt like if I didn't really get feedback, I wouldn't know. So that's one of the tips that I would recommend, that you also seek feedback, try and understand the issue or the problem a bit more. And then another tip would be being self-aware and trying to understand how are you contributing to the situation, right? Because your manager has a perspective, you have a perspective, and it's important to come to the middle ground. So how am I contributing to the conversation? How am I coming out as being solution driven as opposed to be defensive? So it's important to be able to understand where that friction is coming from, what you're doing to aid the friction, and what you probably need to do to ease things out and just make things really flow. And to be honest with you, we come to the work environment, we spend 8 hours of our time on the job every day of the week. I mean, honestly, most of our time is spent at the workplace. So, you know, add that to being me, you know, if you figure that out and say, at the best, if I can be in the workplace and make it memorable and conducive, it adds up, right? Not miserable and prejudiced. So it's helpful to create that environment where you feel you belong, and at least the best as possible is an environment that is conducive for you to work. That's really, really very important. So in terms of the self-awareness piece, at the time, I changed jobs. I had my kids with me at the time. My husband wasn't always around. So, you know, if a child was sick in the middle of the night, I was the one taking them to the hospital, and I had to show up at work. So I would say that things were a bit tense in terms of just dealing with family, dealing with work at the same time, ensuring I was meeting deliverables. So, you know, it's almost like I needed to step back and think about putting the oxygen mask on myself first, and just being okay to be able to show myself at work in such a way that I was fully present and not distant. So, you know, just having that self-awareness in terms of how am I contributing to the issue or to the problem, it really, really goes a long way. And it helps you to be able to manage those relationships or areas where you're experiencing friction more effectively. So I would recommend that you do that. And then another tip would be to look at what is triggering the friction in the relationship. So other than me exploring ways to make myself better, I think it's also important to ask that question, that when you show up with the manager, what's their stance? How is their body posture? What's always that issue that triggers them off or they get defensive about? And looking for ways to walk around that and just try and understand a bit more by stepping out of the situation and maybe just coming across as you wanting to make sure that you are showing up as the mature person in the room and engaging your manager to understand what you could do differently, providing feedback to your manager to say that, you know, you received their feedback, these are the things you're doing to work on it, to improve, so they know that you're actually taking action. And just sort of like a concrete example that maybe you can relate to is maybe your manager is stressed about you meeting deadlines and, you know, feels like they always have to push you to get results. Then maybe one of the things you could do is, you know, explain the bandwidth of the project or the scope or the task that you are saddled with, and communicate in a way that they understand that you would need this number of days to complete the task, or that number of days to complete the task. So you manage expectations. And in situations where impromptu deliverables pop up, where you have to respond quickly, then you need to be able to communicate also effectively to let the manager know that, you know, I'm going to do this now because it's really important, but I might delay on doing the other piece of work and all that. So you give them a sense, you know, there's a balancing act really that needs to happen. So it's really important that you are able to manage that. And I know where it sounds like you have a manager, but you also need to understand that you also need to manage your manager. So it's really helpful to come up front, be proactive, be seen as flexible, be seen as cooperative, be seen as supportive. So that's really, really helpful. And I think another tip would be active listening and just being empathetic. And what do I mean by this? I mean, already there's an issue, there's a conflict, and sometimes or most times we we tune off. We don't necessarily listen to the other person. So it's a question of saying, okay, let me put myself in the other person's shoe. If I were the manager, if I were managing me, how would I respond to this? If I were managing me, what would be the expectations? And the reason I say this is because that helps you to listen more and try and understand the angle that they're coming from. And if possible, if you have to write things on stick notes, put them on your mirror, just to encourage yourself if you need to go to work each day. As you brush your teeth, you read through those words of affirmation, whatever it will take for you to show up and be emotionally and mentally engaged, that would foster a solution as opposed to festering a commotion. I would encourage that you do this. And once you're able to be empathetic and look at things differently, maybe a condition could be their personality, could be their backgrounds, could be the communication style, and saying, okay, this is this person's communication style. This is how they talk. This is, for whatever reason, why they're not good. You don't know, but that's it. And how do I navigate through this? I think it would really help a lot so that you are able to show up in your best possible self, and you're promoting collaboration, and you're just seen as somebody that is very responsive and very helpful. And that leads me to maintaining professionalism and, just being mindful of your reputation. So you're in an organization, you may have friction with your manager right now, but it doesn't mean that your manager will be your manager forever, right? So it's very important that you show up. It's very important that you're meeting your deadlines. It's very important that you're seen as responsive, not just your manager, but to all other managers or people that you're working with. So sometimes, while the pill may seem difficult to swallow, I would say that at other times, you just have to deal with it and just move on and just come with that level of professionalism and just show up and do your job. And I know sometimes people have this perspective that when you're at work, you have to be friends with everybody. You don't have to be friends with your workers. You're there to do a service, and you're there to show up. So, you try to maintain that professionalism and do what you really need to do to maintain that and to ensure that your credibility is not put to question. I think that's really, really very important. And I think that with these tips, at least in my experience, it helped me see things differently. It helped me show up differently. It helped me be much more open and resilient in terms of just understanding that my reputation mattered, engaging my clients or stakeholders and doing my possible best to create an atmosphere of camaraderie or teamwork, and all that was really important, and just showing up in that necessary way. So, I mean, being flexible goes without a doubt. And then maybe the question that would pop up after everything has been said and done, and maybe the situation still festers or it's not improving, then I think it's helpful to seek alternative options. And what does that mean? So you might try looking for other roles within the organization so you could move to a different position if possible. And if internally that's not getting traction, you could explore external roles. You don't have to, if you allow me, die in the organization. I mean, there are other organizations where you could go and work and, just for your own emotional well-being and stability. So that's another option in terms of, evaluating what options you are in the event that the situation is toxic, in the event that, the environment is not productive and it's impacting your well-being. I mean, change your job, move out of the role, or, for your own good. And I think it's helpful also to self-care, right? How do you manage stress? Are you actively engaged in activities, exercising, taking a stroll, or just, relaxing? You need to take care of yourself. Now, in certain situations, it's come to a point where, as an HR professional, if I'm looking at it from that lens, where you've had colleagues come to you, approach you to raise a concern about their manager and, talk about the things that's really driving home and making them uncomfortable. I would suggest that if you have to do that, then just be mindful that it has to be managed carefully, because at this point, it's almost like a journey of no return, because depending on how that conversation goes and how the HR person is able to manage that circumstance, it could be just downhill from there. So it's helpful to consult wisely in terms of possible steps that you want to take. And I think it's also helpful to also keep records. So what do I mean by this? If you're told or you've agreed to do a task, maybe just confirming on email, responding constructively and professionally to say you've done this, or explaining the situation. So that kind of comes up as some form of evidence, may be helpful, and just really focusing on your work to make sure that in the event that there's feedback solicited from other colleagues, at the best possible, you get a positive feedback based on how you're interacting with other colleagues within the organization. So I do believe that these tips will be helpful for you. Remember, while you cannot control your manager's behavior, at least you can control your own behavior, you can control your own actions, you can control your own reactions. And so by cultivating a self-awareness, employing very strategic communication techniques where you've calmed yourself down before you engage in any conversation, so that you are coming out as civilized, professional, really very helpful in terms of improving your work relationship and contributing to a healthy organizational climate within the office. So I hope these insights have been helpful. Please leave a review, share your thoughts, and let me know. And if you still need further support or information, feel free to contact me for a coaching call, and I'll do my best to help you through the situation. Again, continue to stay tuned into the Help We Need podcast to live your best life. And don't forget to stay empowered, and remember to empower health.